Alright, so in this video, we're going to be continuing our setup a little bit further and just moving on now into the user's service. Specifically, we're going to be looking at setting up our database, running our first migration, getting TypeORM all set up and working, all that kind of good stuff. So I've got my stuff over here, and I'm going to go into the user service. And the first thing I'm going to do is install a few packages, and I'm going to show you which ones I'm going to install inside of package.json. Let me just bring this one down to the bottom here so it's probably a bit easier to see. And down here in the bottom, we're going to go into the user service like so, and then inside of here we're going to add in 4 dependencies that we're going to need. So we're going to do yarn add config MySQL2, reflect metadata, and also TypeORM. So these are the 4 dependencies we're going to install. Config in particular is just so that we can set up our configuration. In the previous microservices project and in other tutorials I've done, I've always been using .env, but this is one that I also have found to work really well, and this is one that I'm going to include here. And then on top of that, I'm also going to add in MySQL2, which we will need in order for TypeORM to interface with MySQL, obviously. And then we also have reflect metadata, which is also needed for TypeORM. So this is pretty much from their installation guide as well, so we can just kind of use the same thing over here. And in terms of dev dependencies, we're going to need a few here as well. So we're just going to go do yarn add -d, and we're going to add in 2 types libraries. So we're going to do types/config and @types/node, so an @ sign before both. And these ones are used inside of TypeScript so that we can have types for certain libraries that might not have type definitions built into them. So in the case of TypeORM, you might have guessed from the name is that it's actually built kind of with TypeScript in mind, but some other libraries, in this case, for example, config, they actually don't have support for TypeScript out of the box, which is why we use @types/config in order to provide the type definitions for that library. On top of that, we also have @types_node, which adds it to the standard node.js library as well. We're also going to install tsnode as a dev dependency, and I'm going to show you what that does later on as well. So now that we've got these over here, we've got all of our dependencies installed as necessary, and we are going to go into src here, and we're going to create a directory called db. Well, you can do new file, and inside of here, we're going to do db/connection.ts. So this is the file we're going to write, and this is going to be where we start our connection to the MySQL database. So now inside of this file here, what we're going to do is write in here, import config from config. So we're going to be using the config, and obviously I haven't set this up just yet, but we're going to set that up really soon. And we're also going to do import create connection. Connection should probably come first actually if we're following strict alphabetical order here from TypeORM here like so. And then we're going to do let connection be of type connection. So we're just going to do this, and then we're going to do export const init connection is equal to async function like so. So we're going to have an async function which we will need in order to set up our connection. And then we're going to set this connection variable equal to await create connection with 2 n's, not 3, connection like so. And then we're going to do type is MySQL, and then here we're going to do URL, and we're going to write config.get users service db URL. So obviously I need to set this up, but I'll show you here that we've got a squiggly line. And if you actually hover over it, you see that it says that, it says that basically type unknown is not assignable to type string. And if you kind of hover around a bit more and use IntelliSense, you'll kind of see why, because the actual config.get here actually returns a type of unknown. And you can kind of confirm this by just pasting it over here. And if you hover over this, you'll kind of see that it returns unknown. And the reason is because the config can return pretty much anything, and TypeScript doesn't have advanced enough static analysis in order to figure that out. So what we're going to do is just typecast it to basically tell TypeScript that this is going to come in as a string. And there are 2 ways you can do that. You can do a kind of tag at the beginning like so, or you can do as string afterwards. It's just 2 ways of writing the same syntax. So we're going to do something like this, and then we're going to do const get connection is equal to, and we're just going to return the connection like so, and then we're just going to do export default get connection. So we can use this if we're going to get the connection to do something with it, or something like that. So now we have this config here. So let's actually get this set up, and what we're going to do is inside of user service, so not inside of src, we're going to right click new file, and we're going to do config/default.ts. So config, the config library by default has a series of kind of, I guess, standards that it tends to follow. And this is one of the standards, is having a config directory in the top level, and then having default.ts. So default obviously represents all the default values for the config you're going to set. And then you can also have other files like development and production, and those can correspond obviously to different node.env values and all that kind of stuff. But for now, we're just going to use default because we don't have any of that kind of stuff to set up. So inside of here, we're just going to write in export const users service DB URL. So obviously this matches the same name here. And we're going to do MySQL root password like so. So this is I don't know what you call this, like a DB URL or something like that, at users service DB/DB. So let's break it down. This is the DB engine. So MySQL, the username is root, password is password, at, and then this is the host, and the port would also go here if you had a port, but ours is just the default 3306. So this is the host name, which is users service DB. If you remember, I mentioned that it gets resolved by Docker. So this actually refers to users service DB, which is the same name here. So it actually refers to this Docker container, which then on port 3306, it goes to the database, and then the database name is DB, which we also have set up over here. So basically all of this kind of correlates, and you can start to see the connections there between the various bits. So we're going to save this file here, and now we have this connection set up. So now that we have this, we should be able to go into index.ts, and inside of this file here, instead of writing just user service say hi, we're going to import reflect metadata. So this is needed in order to get TypeORM to work properly, and then we're going to do import init connection from hashroot DB connection. Now you see I did this hashroot thing here, and you see I'm getting an error. So let's just fix this error here before we continue. So what we actually need to do is go into user service. I'm going to right click, create a new file, and I'm going to create a file called tsconfig.json. So this is a file that we're going to be using to configure TypeScript specifically for user service. So inside of here, this is what I'm going to write. So compiler options, and this is where we're going to define all of our properties, and these ones basically just configure the compiler in a little bit of detail. We're going to do emit decorator metadata is true. Experimental decorators is true. Some of these things are needed by TypeORM. Some of them are just kind of more default options that I like to use. But all in all, you can feel free to customize this however you wish. But some of these will be necessary. So you can just kind of copy paste it as is if you wish, and then kind of customize it to your liking further on as well. So we can do ES module interrupt here. This one is true as well. And we're going to do force consistent casing file names to be true. Module is going to be common.js. And the paths here, we're going to do hashroot, and then anything inside hash, we're going to define to .src / here like so. So this will get our thing working. And if I actually save this file now and come over here, you'll see that I no longer get that error. But we're going to continue writing out the rest of this file. So skip lib check is going to be true. Strict here is also going to be true. And by the way, if you want to see what each of these does, you can simply just kind of hover over it, and it'll give you a pretty good definition. And you can obviously feel free to search it up online as well, if you so wish. So we also got a strict property initialization to be false. And then we're going to write target here is going to be ES5. So once you've written this up, just save this file and close it, and we'll kind of use the same one in the other services later on as well. So just kind of keep that file handy. And back inside of index.ts, we're just going to do init connection with two n's once again, .then, and we're going to just do a very simple function here that just says console.log DB connection established. So what we're trying to do here is just connect to the database and see if this works. And now that we have this set up here, we've got our tsconfig.json. Inside of package.json though, we do need to include an alias in order to get the module alias thing here working. So what we're going to do is just at the bottom here, we're going to type in _ module aliases. And this is how module alias works, is we do something like this, and then we do hashroot, and we're just going to map that to ./src. So we do something like this, we save, and then once you save this, what we'll have to do is run this whole thing inside of Docker Compose. So we're going to go down here, cd ... and then we're going to maybe move this one to the side now, so it's probably easier to see this way. Bring it out a bit, clear, and let's do Docker Compose up, and let's see if we can see DB connection established. So we're just going to wait for that to go on, and we'll kind of be looking here for users service. So we're looking for the light blue one. Just give that a second to see if it works at all. And great, it says DB connection established, so we'll take it that now it's working properly. And we can actually kind of test this a little bit to see if it's actually working or if it's just kind of, messing with us. If we change this password here to have an E, for example, and now that we save it, you see that it says restarting because this file has been modified, and now you see we get an error. So we get access denied for user at this IP, and this is an internal Docker IP. Using password yes, because our password is wrong. So once we change that back and it restarts again, you see we get DB connection established. So if you're wondering how the restart also works, it's actually because we have it set up inside of Docker Compose, so that inside of user service, we have this volume kind of mirrored that way. So then we can detect the changes whenever we make changes here. It goes into /opt/app. And then inside of here, we're also using tsnode-dev. So this one will actually read this file and also any file kind of in this general vicinity, and it will detect changes and reload as appropriate. So Now that we have this working, we're going to be setting up our first migration, which is actually going to help us add some tables into our database. So what I'm going to do here is just cancel this process here on the side. So stop my containers for now. I'm not going to need them for the time being. I'm going to bring this one back to the bottom just so it's a little bit easier to see, hopefully, and I can type my code a bit more easily. It does kind of take some time sometimes to stop all the containers. So just be patient is probably my recommendation. That way you don't lose data or, run into weird issues with like node modules and stuff like that, which can happen and has happened for me. So now that you've done this, we're just going to clear that really quickly. And we're going to run a special command to generate a migration file for us, and TypeORM makes that relatively easy. So in order to do that, let's actually reference the TypeORM documentation. So if you just type in TypeORM in your browser here, and let's go to their website, zoom in a bit on this one here, and let's go down to advanced topics migrations, and we can go to creating a new migration. So this documentation obviously is your friend, and feel free to refer to it and kind of use it as a source of truth when you're kind of messing around with this kind of stuff yourself. But what we're going to do here is just run this one here. So it says TypeORM migration create -n, and then this is the name of your table. Well, it's the name of the migration, but I tend to use the name of the table, and I think that's kind of what they're going for as well. But we're going to use this part here. So we're going to copy that. And in order to run it, you'll notice that we have it installed as a dependency. So what TypeORM actually recommends is for you to install it globally. I don't really like to do that. So instead, what we can do is actually run it inside of node modules. So one way you can do it is like node modules and then .bin. How does it work? Oh wait, oops. I have to go into the user service and do like node modules.bin and then TypeORM like that. You can do that, but I actually prefer to just use yarn. So if you use yarn at the beginning and you type in like TypeORM, which is not a script we have here, it'll automatically go looking for the binary inside of either the dependencies or dev dependencies. Basically, it goes looking inside of node modules for this one here. So we're going to type this, and then afterwards we're going to just type users in lowercase and press enter. Once this is done, you'll notice that it generates you a file, but this one actually generates it in the root here, which is my mistake. I forgot to write another file. So I'm just going to delete this really quickly, and we're going to go into user service, right click new file, and we're going to create a file called Orm Config Json. And this file is going to be used to configure TypeORM to work properly when we're doing stuff like this. So we're going to go here and just type in CLI. And we're going to do migrations. dir is going to be src db migrations like so. We're going to do entities, and these ones are going to be src db entities and then all.ts, so all the TS files. This is a glob, and obviously we'll be setting this up later on as well. Logging is going to be false, so we don't need that. Obviously you can change that to true. Migration is going to do src db migrations like that. And then synchronize is going to be true. Type is MySQL. And then the URL, basically just that same URL we had over here. So you can actually just copy that over and paste it inside of there. So now that we have this file set up, let's try running this thing one more time. And once you run that, you'll see that it appears inside of DB migrations, and you've got that file over there. So here's your file, and you've got this class here, and it actually puts the current timestamp afterwards as well. So you can feel free to keep that. But I like to put this U as a capital letter because I like to have classes in Pascal case or something similar. So that's just how I like to do things, but it shouldn't affect your code either way. And inside of this file here, what we're going to do is go into this set of curly braces here. And for some reason, it's got spaces 4. So let me just change that to spaces 2, which is probably more appropriate. And we're going to do await query runner.create table. So it gives you a nice set of suggestions here as well, thanks to TypeScript IntelliSense. That is one of the nicer things about TypeScript, is having that support inside of VS Code. We just need to include table up here as well to include the table, and we're going to do columns, and here are the columns we're going to use. So the first one's going to be our primary key. The length is going to be 36 for a UUID, and the name is going to be ID, and the type is going to be char. So basically this is just a standard UUID for your users. And then we're going to have another one. This one's going to be length 25. The name is going to be username, and the type is going to be varchar. So a varchar, just a string with a maximum length of 25 for the username. And then for the password, we're going to be using bcrypt. So bcrypt generates a hash that is of length 60 all the time. So we're going to use that, and then name is going to be password hash, and the type is going to be char. Let's do one more. This one's going to have a default value of now. The name is going to be created at, and the type is going to be timestamp. So this just defines when our record was created. And then over here underneath this square bracket, we're going to do name here is users. So that defines the name of our table. So let's save that real quick and I'll put in our comments for us. So we got await query runner dot create table. This is our table definition with columns and also with the name, which is users. So now that you've got that, let's actually add something else into here, which is going to make our username unique. So we want our username to be unique. And you might wonder, okay, then if you're going to make the username unique, why don't you just use that as the ID? And the reason for this is because you might want the username to be unique, but you might also want the username to be easily changeable. So then you want a single source of truth for it. But the problem is that if you make the username the identifier, you also have to use it as a foreign key. So then if you use it in different places and you make that username your foreign key as well, it becomes very, very difficult to change. So overall, this actually makes the most sense where you have a unique ID and also the primary key. And then your username, if you want it to be unique, it can be, but then you can also change it. So you have that enforcement at a kind of table level. And then when you use it in your code, then you won't have clashing usernames, which is pretty cool as well. So over here, we're going to add in a one for table index after the table. I'm going to go down here and do await query runner dot create index, if I can spell that. And then we're going to add in, for the users table, we're going to add in new table index, column names. And basically this is the index, or the columns that you're going to add the index to. And obviously we just have username in this case. It's going to be a unique index, and the name is just going to be a unique username like so. So now you've got this set up, what it will basically do is create your table, and then afterwards create the index that we're adding in for our unique username. And then down here for the down command, we're going to do await query runner dot drop table users. So technically your down command is meant to kind of revert your up command. So if you create a table, then you can drop the table in the down command. The reason I don't drop the index is because the index is on the table. So it's kind of like if you throw away a plate with a dish on it, then you don't have to throw away the two separately. That's basically what I'm doing here. So just throwing away the dish as a whole, metaphorically. So I've got this up and this down, and that's how migrations work, is you kind of need to write both the up and the down, and then that way you can kind of roll your table forward and backwards as you please. Now, one question you might have, and I kind of had this when I first saw this for the first time, is, well, then what happens to your data? If you create the table, add in a bunch of data, and then drop it, where does the data go? Well, the data is lost forever, and that is definitely a problem, which is why you need to be careful with rolling back stuff in production. You need to have backups, you need to do data migration, yada yada, and that gets into like a whole series of complexities. Basic summary is that working with databases is a lot of fun, but in general, this is a great way for us to kind of get into that, is just to use migrations in order to define the kind of evolution of our database over time, so that when you have further changes on your database, you can define them as further migrations. So that way the state of your database at any point in time can be represented in your code, which is really, really awesome. So now that we have this set up here, let's actually go and run our migration. And in order to do that, we're going to go into package.json, and we're going to set up two scripts for us to migrate and also to undo the migration. So the first one we're going to add is db migrate. So this is just a naming convention I like to use. And what we're going to do is do tsnode./node modules TypeORM CLI.js migration run. Now, the reason we do this is you can actually just do TypeORM migration run, but then the problem is you can't use TypeScript, which is kind of ironic given that it's TypeORM, but it's just this kind of thing which appears on their website. And basically, if you want to use TypeScript, then you have to kind of compile it yourself, which is why we need tsnode. It does make it a little bit slower, but it's just a migration. You don't run it every so often, and it's a one-time compilation at the beginning. It doesn't kind of increase as your migration size increases, so it's generally manageable. We're going to have that, just duplicate it, and then do undo afterwards, and change this one to migration revert, obviously to revert the migrations. So now that we have these two set up, let's actually try running our migration. But we can't do it here, and that's because we don't have the same type of connection. Well, we technically could run our migration here if we changed this URL here, so that instead of pointing to this, we'd probably have to point to the external port and host here. So we'd probably do 7201. You can do like localhost 7201, and it probably would work. But we'd probably want to just keep everything inside of the Docker container. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is go down here, and let's actually just get this thing running. So we're going to go out and then do Docker compose up again. So this will just get everything running for us, our databases and our servers and everything as well. And then we're going to go over here to the side and do Docker compose. I have to go out a bit. Docker compose exec, and we're going to type in users service and then bash like so. So once you've done this, now we're inside of the user service. And if you do an ls, you'll see that we actually have the user service stuff. You see Orm Config Json, which is this file here. And then now from inside of here, we can actually do yarn db migrate. So hopefully if everything went well, this should work properly for us. So now let's press enter and let's see how we go. Like I said, this will take a couple seconds to initially compile, but it's not really a huge deal. And you see ours is done. So there you go. It's kind of done the create unique index. It's created the table as well. So hopefully we should be able to see this now in phpMyAdmin. So let's go to localhost 7300. Let's go over into our user service and go into DB, and you'll see we have our users table here. So we've got the ID, username, password, hash created at, perfectly defined just as we want it. And you'll notice that we also have our unique username index here as well. So that's all worked beautifully. But now what we need to do is one final thing, which is to define the actual entity that describes the users table. And what I mean by this is that when you're using an ORM, so the fundamental concept of an ORM is that it should be an object relational mapper. So you need this idea of a model or like, a class or something which can create these objects which represent the data that you're trying to store. So the way that we do that inside of TypeORM is with this concept called an entity. So we're going to put all of our entities inside of an entities directories inside of DB, and ours is going to be called user.ts like so. And now inside of here, we're just going to do import a few things. So column, let's do create date column, entity, and also primary generated column here as well from TypeORM. I can type that out. And let's do a few decorators here. So we're going to do entity users, and users here just means the users table. So that's how you define that. So you can see we have the name here, which can be a string, which is basically the name of our table. And then export default class user. And this one's going to be our primary generated column, which is going to be a UUID. And then this one's going to be ID string. And we're going to have at column. This one's going to be a username. And we're also going to have our password here. So this one we're going to have select false. And this is quite important so that we don't actually select the password hash just willy-nilly. And this makes it just a little bit harder to kind of, expose your passwords to an external hacker or whatever. Like I do know that this is technically a backend microservice, but even in that case, I think it's important for us to have that kind of safeguard in place, so to speak, so that wherever possible, we can kind of limit the access. So the principle of least privilege is kind of what we're going for here. And this just really helps us to do that. Let's have our create date column. So this is specifically for our created at. So let me just kind of explain what's going on here. So we have these four properties defined inside of our user. So these are expected to exist once our user object has been created. And then we have these decorators, which kind of add additional functionality on top of them. And the best way to explain this here is to just look at it at a surface level without kind of going into the detail of how it's transpiled and all that kind of stuff. But basically this means that our user class is an entity, means this one is a primary generated column of type UUID. Remember how I set it to 36. This one is our just a standard column. This one is a column. Select false means you can't just select it. And then create date column is specifically every time you create a record, it adds in the current timestamp into that record as well. So now that we have this entity set up and it's been exported, we're actually going to add that into our connection.ts file. So just go over here and do import user from /entities/user, and we can include it inside of here using entities and user like so. And let's just say we misspell this. So this is how I know I did it correctly. You notice that it all goes red and squiggly. So this tells us that we're doing it correctly when we have user here. You also can't just write anything you want inside of there. So this is one of the great things about TypeScript is it really does, when it works well, it works beautifully. So that's all I've got for you in this video. Basically what we did, just a quick recap, is we set up TypeORM and also Tsconfig as well, and kind of looked at some migrations, looked at entities, kind of explored all these concepts, and also looked at putting everything together using configuration. In the next video, we're going to be kind of exploring these in a bit more detail, really looking at how we can properly flesh out the user service as a service itself and really build out some more business features in that respect.